Hi, Wild Hearthstone YouTube. Keith here again. The United and Stormwind mini-set Deadmines was announced today, and as promised, I'm delivering a quick and dirty review of the cards that they've spoiled so far. If you don't want Deadmines spoilers, this is your warning. Stop watching the video, go do something else. Anyway, I'm reviewing the 16 common cards that were spoiled with the initial announcement, and the way I'm doing it is in a tier list format. Every card gets a tier rating, and here are the definitions. Tier S cards are the ones that are most likely to be nerfed and are just very powerful, a lot of them in an obvious sense. A common card that I would consider S tier in United and Stormwind would be Battlegrounds Battlemaster. An A tier card is going to be a strong card that does what it does very well, and it sees play frequently. Good example of this is something like Moarg Forge Fiend. B tier is cards that are good enough to see play but aren't necessarily auto-includes, or they're often solid tech cards but are meta-dependent. A good example of this is something like Rust Raw Viper. C tier are cards that are rarely played, but they're not necessarily unplayable. They often fill a certain niche or can find a corner case where they're useful. Good example of this is something like Pandaren Importer. Finally, D tier cards are completely unplayable. Either they're too expensive or too weak or too vanilla, and a lot of them just don't do anything. Like, for example, Florist. These ratings are for Wild specifically. We're not taking into account any other game modes, including Standard. These are also first impressions. I could be right, I could be wrong. No one really knows yet how strong these cards are going to be. So take these ratings with a grain of salt. Now let's get into it. Now we're doing this in class order, starting with Demon Hunter. The first card up is going to be Crow's Nest Lookout. Crow's Nest Lookout is a 3-mana minion, a little understated, deals 2 damage to the left and right most enemy minions on Battlecry. You would see this as a board control tool. Demon Hunter is really underpowered in Wild though, and this doesn't really match up with any existing Demon Hunter archetypes. It's a card that could be useful later as maybe like a B or C tier card, but I'm not really seeing it in United and Stormwind, where it's hard enough for Demon Hunter to really get any traction at all. We're going to call Crow's Nest Lookout C tier. Next up, Need for Greed. Need for Greed is a Demon Hunter spell. 5 mana, tradable, draw 3 cards. If drawn this turn, it costs 3. Now, we already know that 3 mana, draw 3 cards is very good. We've already seen this with Backfire. This being tradable means that you can prepare for it, kind of like you would with Skull of Gul'dan, but I expect this card to be reasonably strong. The trick is, again, Demon Hunter's not particularly powerful right now. If odd Demon Hunter ever really gains traction, this seems like a pretty solid include in that deck. So I'm going to rate Need for Greed B tier. Druid of the Reef, 1 mana 1/1 with a battle cry, or should I say a choose one, transform into a 3/1 shark with rush or a 1/3 turtle with taunt. Druid aggro decks and Druid bum rush decks aren't really hurting for minions right now, so that being said, this is a pretty strong minion in its own right. The shark form is pretty strong as a removal card, especially if you compare it to the 2 mana 3/1 Murloc that exists. Like, you wouldn't play that, and you probably wouldn't play this either compared to something like Jasper Spellstone, but I mean, it's not terrible. As a 1 mana 1/3, I mean, if you were the kind of deck that would play something like Dire Mole, you might play this too. It's not amazing compared to like a turn 1 pirate or anything quite on that scale, but it's probably useful. We'll put this one in the B tier. Next for Hunter, a Defias Blastfisher. It's 5 mana 3/2 pirate. Battlecry, deal 2 damage to a random enemy, repeat for each of your beasts. Hunter doesn't really do very well with super expensive cards like this, especially ones that are conditional. I don't see this one being relevant ever. Certainly not in Wild. It takes a lot to make this work. This is definitely a D tier. Monstrous Parrot's a 4 mana 3/4 beast. Battlecry, repeat the last friendly death rattle that was triggered. I'm going to assume that this is something like, it's not that the minion gets the death rattle, it's that the death rattle triggers immediately. So you play this, you get the thing. This works okay for something like an old school death rattle hunter deck. Those decks are pretty fun, sometimes reasonably competitive. Never really mainstream though. So I don't really expect this to be a very popular card, but I do know that this is not a bad card. I probably put this one at a high C tier. Alright, next up for Mage, Grey Sage Parrot. 8 mana 6/6 Battlecry, repeat the last spell you cast that cost 5 or more. This card is very expensive. I guess the idea is that you would be able to recur big effects like, say, Puzzle Box or something like that. And if that's the case, if you are the kind of person that needs more than one Puzzle Box to do your thing, you're probably not having much luck on ladder anyway. Yeah, this card is quite bad. I'm going to place this one in the D tier. Next for Paladin, Sunwing Squawker, 4 mana 3/4, Battlecry, repeat the last spell you cast on a friendly minion on this. as a beast. So you would obviously play this in something like a Libram deck or something playing Hand of It All. Like, there are a lot of obvious cards that go very well with this card. Whether it's worth it on a 4-mana 3/4, consider this. Like, if you cast this and the last card was a Libram, you have a 4-mana 4/5 that gives you an extra Libram. If it was Hand of It All, it's a 4-mana 5/5 that draws you a card. And if you're the kind of deck that plays a lot of single target buffs, this card can be really strong. You can combo this with Libram of Hope, get another 8/8 for free if you target a minion with Libram of Hope. It's sort of like Lanessa, except much cheaper. This card is definitely going to see play in those kinds of decks. Whether or not those decks are going to be very strong is kind of up in the air. This one, it feels like a B tier card because of all the strengths. Really, it's just going to be a matter of whether or not the kind of deck this goes in is one that's worth playing. Okay, next up, 4 Priest, Amulet of Undying. 3-mana tradable card. It's a shadow spell. Resurrect 1 friendly Death Rattle minion. It upgrades when traded. I believe means you resurrect more minions. So resurrect 2 minions, resurrect 3 minions, etc., etc. So resurrect effects are obviously pretty good as long as you have things that are worth resurrecting. Whether that's like Obsidian Statue, or Light Shower Elemental, or Moarg Forge Fiend, or even like Elwyn Boar. Priest decks that want to play those kinds of cards are going to play a card like this. Is it better than the existing resurrect effects? Not necessarily. Like Twilight's Call, for instance, gives you 2 minions right off the bat without any finagling. Resurrect is 1 random minion for 2 mana. Eternal Servitude is 4 mana, choose a minion, which is a little more expensive, but you get a lot of control over that effect. And any effect that summons more things is clearly going to scale much better. The trick with this card is getting big things like the Moarg Forge Fiends and the Obsidian Statues. Takes a little bit of setup, but Big Priest does a lot of stalling and setting up for a big swing anyway, so yeah, it'll work out. Like, it's definitely playable. I don't know if I'd call it an A tier card because it's not very general purpose. It fits specifically in a deck like Big Priest. So that would probably put it at B or C. The strength of the card tells me it's going to be a solid B. Okay, next up, Defias Leper, 2 mana, 3/2 pirate, battlecry. If you're holding a shadow spell, deal 2 damage. This is obviously a very good card. Any playable cheap pirate is obviously going to see play, especially considering that there's already a priest deck that plays pirates that could certainly use an extra pirate that does free damage and summons patches and summons Parachute Brigand and stuff like that, right? Like, you're obviously going to play this card in that deck. No question this card sees play. Now, is it busted? No. This is comparable to something like South Coast Chieftain, the 2-mana Murloc that says deal 2 damage to another minion if you control a Murloc. Different condition, but it's still conditional, and it's about the same stat line. It's better than that card straight up, though, because this can summon Patches and Parachute Brigand. But that being said, once Patches and Parachute Brigand, once you've already got that out of the way, this isn't really that much better than South Coast Chieftain. Right, like if you don't have the shadow spell, this is Bloodfin Raptor. So good, but not broken. We'll see play, but won't be the end-all be-all of Wild. Pretty clear A tier. Next up for Rogue, Blackwater Cutlass. 1 mana, 2/2 weapon. It's tradable. After you trade it, reduce the cost of a spell in your hand by 1. So this is another combo setup card. It's pretty on flavor for Rogue, I think. It's a lot like Prep or Octobot or something like that. An obvious deck for this would be something like Malygos Rogue, but that deck doesn't really exist. I don't really think Pillager Rogue's very interested in this. Like, without really understanding where this is going to go, it's hard to gauge this card. Without an obvious home, it's going to be probably a C tier card. If it became a staple somehow in a powerful deck, you would see it elevated to B or A tier. Without a home, it's going to be C. Next up for Shaman, Brilliant Macaw. 3 mana, 3/3 beast, battlecry, repeat the last battlecry you played. I take it based on the language that this carries over from turn to turn. So if you played a battlecry last turn or the turn before, this will assume whatever that last battlecry was. This is very strong with a deck like Shudderwalk or Reno Shudderwalk Shaman, which will play a lot of battlecries. It works well with things like Lotheb or Serenite Chain Gang, things like that, right? With the right preparation and setup, this card can be very strong for what it is. Will this see play? Absolutely. Will this be a staple in Shaman? Not necessarily. Because of that, we're gonna put this in B tier, probably high B tier. Next up for Warlock, Shadowblade Slinger. It's a 1 mana, 2/1 pirate. Has a battle cry. If you've taken damage this turn, deal that much damage to an enemy minion. Clearly a strong card, because it's a 1 mana 2/1 pirate. Any 1 mana pirate is playable, or almost any, just on the virtue of pulling patches and Parachute Brigand. Warlock historically has had decks that are interested in playing pirates to put the extra body on board. Probably an Easy Shorn and Cute Lock. Wouldn't see it anywhere else though. We're gonna call this one a B tier. Also in Warlock, Wicked Shipment, 1 mana spell, tradable, summon 2 1/1 imps, upgrades by 2 when traded. After you've traded it, you get summon 4 1/1 imps. This card, like, if it was just 1 mana, summon 2 1/1 imps, you can compare this to something like Lost in the Jungle for upfront value, but this is a Lost in the Jungle that can get better, which is kind of interesting. Is there any Warlock strat that would appreciate a Lost in the Jungle? Well, Cute Lock would do it. 1 mana for 2 bodies is pretty strong there. Not broken, but solid. The tradable, I don't think is going to be relevant for a card like this that often. The other application I can see for this, though, is Darkest Hour Warlock. It's an old strat that got nerfed a while back, but it's still see some fringe play. The combo for that is a token generator plus Blood Bloom plus Darkest Hour equals a bunch of big things. This is the cheapest token generator that we've seen in Warlock in the game so far. This card will definitely fit into that deck if it exists. Does this make that deck that much better? It gives you access to the combo again by turn 5, but without upgrading it, it's not a very big combo. This is what I would call a B tier card. There is a use for it, but it's not going to be a universal one. Next up for Warrior, Defias Cannoneer. This is the BS card of the set so far. It's a 3 mana 3/3 pirate. After your hero attacks, deal 2 damage to a random enemy twice. So it's double cannons and a 3/3 body for a pirate. Questline Pirate Warrior is probably the best or second best deck in the game right now for Wild, depending on who you ask. And this is a straight up upgrade to some other cards that you might be tempted to put in that deck, like say Skybarge or the 3/4 that gives you +2 attack. You pair this with N'Zoth's First Mate or an early Ankar, and you just start shooting things. Is it broken? On rate, it's actually kind of ridiculous. And keep in mind that compared to a card like Ship's Cannon, it's a little more expensive, but it has a bigger effect, and it's easier to set up, rather than require multiple cards on the turn that you play him. I might even say I'd call this one S tier. Like S tier? S tier. Either A tier or S tier. We'll hedge a bet here and say S tier. Like, there's not really anything else that looks as strong as this right now. Alright, next up, Man the Cannons. 2 mana warrior spell. Deal 3 damage to a minion and 1 damage to all other minions. You can compare this to something like Minefield, an old warrior spell that's 2 mana, deal 5 damage randomly to all minions. This is kind of a targeted Minefield. Obviously a very, very strong removal spell. Even though it's a strong removal spell, it doesn't have an obvious home right now, but let's say the meta somehow shifts where slower decks like Deadman's Hand Warrior or some kind of ETC OTK Warrior or something are more playable. This would slot pretty easily into a deck like that. We're gonna call this one an A tier card. Alright, last of the commons. This is a neutral 3 mana 2/3 pirate, Galaka Glutton. Battlecry, destroy a beast and gain +1/+1. Alright, so the joke is obvious. You have Galaka Crawler. That was a beast that destroys pirates. This is a pirate that destroys beasts. It's obviously a little more expensive than Galaka Crawler was, because Galaka Crawler was a very, very absurd rate for a tech card. Considering that, a 3 mana 2/3 destroy a beast is obviously meta dependent. Are there any beasts or beast decks that are relevant for this? No, absolutely not. In the event that we do have some kind of meta situation where you would need to hate on beasts, this is a fair card. 3 mana is a lot to pay for it, but if you compare it to something like Big Game Hunter or something like that, it's pretty fair. Pretty fair, and narrow application means we're gonna have to call this one French. Alright, that's it for the Deadmines commons. S tier we have Defias Cannoneer, A tier Defias Leper and Man the Cannons, B tier Need for Greed, Shadow Blade Slinger, Brilliant Macaw, Druid of the Reef, Sunwing Squawker, Amulet of Undying, and Wicked Shipment. Everything else is C tier or below. You can expect the A tier and above cards to see play in Wild, probably a few of the B tiers too. The S tier will 100% see play in Pirate Warrior. Absolutely. No question. So there it is. So what do you think of these ratings? If you're a Wild gamer and you want to weigh in on this, if you think that I misrated a card or I ignored something about a card or missed something, let me know in the comments. I'm very excited to see what the new set has in store beyond this. We're going to do more ratings videos. So if you like what you see and you want to see more of it, do the YouTube thing. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching.